hit the button. Uh, hey everyone, welcome to the Tom's Hardware podcast for January 31st, 2023. As always, I'm Tom's Hardware Editor in Chief, Avram Pelch. I'm joined by Associate Editor Les Pounder. Ash, who's normally with us, is out sick today. And we have Steve PanicAcid, or PanicAcid Steve, with us today as our special guest to talk about some really awesome things. A really awesome project he worked on with an ancient pager. Uh, before we get into that project, Steve, what can you tell folks about yourself and projects that you've done before?
I'm a bit of a tinkerer. Oh, sorry. I'm a bit of a tinkerer. So I tend to play with lots of different things. In my professional career, I'm a solutions architect. So I design Azure infrastructures, on-premise infrastructures, but probably projects that I'm most known for will be war driving. I'm a bit of a wireless nerd. And Raspberry Pi projects, I've got loads, to be honest. You'll have to forgive me if I get a bit nervous. As soon as that big live light came up, I started to panic a little bit, hence the name. But yeah, Raspberry Pis, I've been tinkering with them since the original Pi came out. I used to have a Xbox Media Center style setup. I've got an Ambilight, network UPS control, loads really. There's pretty much nothing. There isn't a problem that you can't solve with a Pi, I don't think.
Never a truer phrase spoken.
Yeah.
Food related and electronics.
Yes, that is true. There's nothing you really can't fix. So this latest project you have takes ancient, which we always love this concept. You take an ancient technology and control it with a Pi. What can you tell us about that?
I mean, to be honest, I've got a little bit of imposter syndrome over this project because it wasn't that difficult. But I guess it's one of those where I see it as really easy, but people are like, oh, I didn't realize you could do that. So it takes a few people by surprise, but complexity wise, it's really easy. So I think I've seen a couple of articles in the past around the Raspberry Pi, specifically transmitting FM. A lot of people were hosting their own little FM hotspots with Raspberry Pis and stuff. So it basically plays on that. But instead of using it to just transmit normal narrowband or wideband FM, we're using it to transmit narrowband FM POXAG signals, which using a really cool project that somebody else has come up with on the Raspberry Pi called RPiTX. You can bounce POXAG signals out by bit banging the Raspberry Pi the same way you would with an FM transmitter. Sorry. In hindsight, it was probably very irresponsible of me to show people doing that because it's not good for the spectrum. There's really weird harmonics when you just bounce it straight out of GPIO pin 4 with a piece of wire. But yeah, the project itself is really simple. So I'll probably say the hardest part was actually talking to the pager to program it and decode some information from it, which, to be honest, is kind of aside from the Pi part, that's using some really old software that I had to emulate in DOSBox. But once I got into the pager and I figured out what the pager was listening to, i.e. the frequency that it was listening on and the RIC or the cap code that it was listening on, it was really easy then to take the RPiTX project to bounce a message out that the pager would receive, which, I thought was really cool. I was doing it as a proof of concept because I do actually want to use the pager on a Pi in order to do some really cool things, like maybe have a syslog server running on the Pi and send messages to the pager on certain events. Because I don't know if anybody's ever owned a pager or heard one going off, but they do not quit. Until you check that message and look at what's going on, that thing will get more and more obnoxious until it gets your attention. Whereas if you do email alerts or push notifications, they're so easy to ignore these days. I'm going off on a bit of a tangent here, but like I still use an iPod for my podcasts and stuff because if I was to use my smartphone, which is with me all the time, and I get my phone out to change track or to go back a few seconds because I missed something, I'll have an email, I'll have a text, there'll be a WhatsApp. There'll be something else that takes my attention away from the real reason I got the device out of my pocket. So I'm kind of going back to basics with stuff like this and using dedicated devices for dedicated things. So iPod for podcasts, pager for alerts and notifications. It just kind of seems logical to me.
It's awesome what you've done with this project. I mean, you say it's just like a GPIO pin and it's sending radio signals, whatever. But it's the workflow that you've gone through to get it to actually do something. I mean, you've gone through DOSBox on another machine. You've used a USB to serial converter to actually program this device. So can you sort of talk us through the process and sort of the mindset of you were going through each step of the way?
Well, I'll be honest, when I started doing this project, I knew nothing about how pagers worked. Like I presumed they worked similar to a mobile cellular phone, whereby there was some sort of communication with a network and there was some sort of, what's the word I'm looking at? Like a targeted notification sent to the pager from the network provider. There really isn't. A pager is literally just the same as any other FM radio, except it's locked to a single frequency. And it's constantly receiving all messages that are broadcast on that frequency. So think of it literally just like a radio. It's tuned in and it's listening. Now, what stops you from getting every notification that is sent out on that frequency, like I say, for example, a national pager frequency here in the UK is 153,350 megahertz. All loads of pages, every page that provider sends to its users goes out on that frequency non-stop. So what pagers do is they kind of have like blinkers on. So the RIC code or the CAP code, I've heard it called both, is basically, think of it as like a PO box number. So each pager has its own PO box number, not necessarily unique, because some emergency services or on-call solutions, multiple pagers with that will have the same RIC code so that they only have to send out one message and they all get it. But essentially the pager sits there looking for its own PO box number, its own RIC code. And when it sees a message that contains that, it then decodes that message and shows it to you as the owner/user of that device. But they're all out there. It's almost like sending a letter to every house on a street, but you only open that letter if it's got your name on it. It's really cool how it works. Very basic. There are encryption technologies now around paging. There have been for a while, but apparently they were very expensive, so nobody really adopted those. But the first hurdle was understanding how paging works. And then once I did that, I decided I needed to buy a pager, and obviously I had to buy the iconic Motorola Advisor. There was no other pager to do this project with, really. Then once I got that, it was like, okay, how do I do anything with this pager? So, for example, the one that I've got here in my hand, I don't know if you can see this on webcam. You probably won't be able to. Let me see if I can get the belt clip off. No, that's not coming off. Essentially, on the back of the pager, there are stickers. And on this one, that's my microphone there. On this one, there's a frequency, and on the bottom, there's a little 7-digit number there. That's basically the RIC. So when I transmit a message for this pager to receive it, I have to transmit it on the frequency that it's listening on and the RIC that is labeled here. Now, the first Motorola Advisor that I got, unfortunately, had that sticker removed. So I knew the frequency that it was listening on, but I didn't know what its RIC was. Now, initially, I wrote a bash script that used ARPITX to brute force the RIC. Because I'm kind of hacky in nature, I thought, well, what better way to find it out than to brute force it? So essentially what it did, and I'll put it on GitHub at some point for people to have a look at, but it basically went through any possible permutation of RIC code and embedded the RIC that it was using at the time that it was trying into the message. So it would send out multiple messages, multiple RICs, and in the message would be the RIC that it sent at the time. And in my brain, the way that worked was, well, when you do finally get a message on the pager, it will include the RIC that you need for your pager in the message. In reality, A, that would take a very long time, and B, that would be very noisy on the spectrum, unless you were using a bandpass filter, or you were doing it through something like a hack RF, and the signal was very clean. You would still have to make sure that you were doing it on a frequency that you had permission to transmit on, and yada yada yada. There's loads of red tape around doing stuff like that, but the option is there if people need it. And then I thought, well, hang on a minute. There's 3 pins on the side of this thing, so there must be a way to program it. So there's a little, I don't know if you're going to be able to see this. Sorry. So there's a little programming interface. No, you're not going to be able to see that because my webcam's rubbish. There you go. So there's a little 3-pin programming interface.
Yeah.
And it's literally a serial interface. We've got transmit, receive, and ground. There's no voltage or power on this, so the pager does need to be powered to program it. So I thought, well, there must be a way to program it. And I've got hardware hacking tools. I've got a TieGuard and stuff like that, and a bus pirate. But I went Googling and found out there is some official Motorola Pager programming software, or PPS as they call them. The only problem is Motorola was very protective of this software, so finding it now is quite difficult.
Mm-hmm.
The Internet Archive is a fantastic website, by the way. Just
Oh,
dropping that
yes.
in there. No hints, but yeah, if you've got some sort of like link death for resources, check out the Internet Archive. So yeah, I went there, found the download. Unfortunately, it's an MS-DOS application, and we've not had MS-DOS in Windows since XP. So the next logical step there was DOSBox. Got DOSBox on, got the software working. Then I had to find a USB serial interface that it would work with. It took a while to find one that was actually compatible with DOSBox. Once I did that, it wouldn't read the pager, and I was having loads of problems with it. Turns out my computer was way too fast. So what I had to do in DOSBox was emulate an old 386 and slow the frames and everything down. Once I did that, I got a successful read on the pager, found out what the RIC code was, and from there I can start bouncing messages to it from the Pi. But it was quite a journey of discovery and a lot of on-the-fly learning. A lot of the stuff that I do, because a lot of people are like, oh, why don't you film this? Why don't you stream it? Why don't you do anything with this? And it's because none of it is premeditated. I sit here with an idea and I bash away until I have a solution, and I promise you it'll be very boring to watch in real time.
I don't know. I saw the video on Twitter, and obviously you had the happy dog there, which was a good luck omen. That was great. In fact, I'll put that video quickly on now so we can have it on the background and still talk. So there it is. So this is a video that I saw and I thought, this is interesting. This is fun. So you got your laptop, you got the page, you got Happy Dog, and you're sending pages to this device. That's 1994, 1995, something like that.
91 to 94, the software said. So yeah, we'll place it in that era.
Oh yeah, I feel old now. Yeah, Hackers was 95, wasn't it? That's what I'm thinking. And that's where this pager comes from. That's the reference, isn't it, for Hack the Planet?
Yes. Yeah.
So
yeah, absolutely. It's iconic in that kind of scene, I think, and just the reaction that it got on Twitter among my peers in this sort of crowd is, I think, testament to the fact that it is so iconic. Everybody's absolutely loved this. I mean, I think last time I looked, there were over 100,000 combined views on TikTok, Twitter, everywhere that I've posted this. I didn't even know there were 100,000 people who still cared about pages. But the fact that there's all these people interacting with it, sharing it, liking it, just tells me that it kind of, I don't know, it hits people in the warm and fuzzies. I think people are like, oh yeah, I remember that film and I loved that thing. In fact, I think even you, Les, did you not say that you've got one of these in your basket on eBay at the minute?
I have it still in the basket. I have not had the purchase approved just yet. Payday was today, so it could be today. But I do fancy it. I mean, obviously, you have to obey the local laws and legislation for radio transmissions for this. So I'm not registered for doing anything like that. So I need to get my license to do so.
How far can you make the transmission? Like how far can it go?
To be honest, I think from a Raspberry Pi, I found anywhere from 3 meters to 300 meters being given out as a ballpark figure for just transmitting through a length of wire. I think there was a project a while ago, and I can't remember what it was called. Something Berry. Sorry, I'm just going to Google this now. Sorry, my obnoxious Cherry MX Blue is there.
Good choice.
What's it called? Yeah.
But he should be using Calebox whites.
No, blues.
Whites are even clickier than the blues if you get the Calebox.
I'm on Kale Red at the moment.
Oh, red. It's linear.
I prefer it for typing. I make less typos.
If that works for you. We were just what you missed at work today, Les. I was having talk in this morning's meeting with Sarah, our peripherals editor, about why she has to hot swap in the Calebox White Owl switches that I sent her to keyboard that she's testing. Anyway, so the rest of you watching and listening, I really recommend clicky key switches. And if you like blue, you'll love Calebox, particularly if you haven't tried them, Calebox Whites, or they now have V2. I'm on Calebox Glazed Green, which is another clicky variety they have. Anyway, sorry.
No, it's fine. To be honest, I appreciate a good mechanical keyboard. I'm just
Now,
very obnoxious with my key switch
all
choices.
of you retro folks, can you recognize my keycaps?
No, I can't.
So these, so I mean, this was my holiday present from my sister-in-law, which I conspicuously asked for. Was a these are technically these are drop.com dasher keycaps, but they are supposed to be replicas of Data General keycaps from Data General terminals from the 70s and 80s. And if you've watched the Apple TV show Severance, their keyboards all have these keycaps. Anyway.
I was going to say Severance is on my to watch list, but I've not watched it yet. Do you recommend?
Yes, I do. And for reasons I'm not spoiling anything by saying this because we don't know why, but for reasons not explained, everybody in the show is using these like Data General old school terminals. And they have keycaps like this, and they have a trackball built into the keyboard.
My first ever keyboard, the first ever PC we had in my house as a child, didn't have up, down, left, right arrows on it. Instead, it had a trackball with a left and right mouse click button.
That's very, very interesting. I had for so many years I had an IBM Model M keyboard as my main keyboard, and then I spilled ginger ale on it, and that was the end. But I want to say that these Kale switches are even better than the Lexmark buckling spring switches in the IBM keyboards. So just my 2 cents. Anyway, that's not what we came here for, but I'm just saying.
It's fun to digress sometimes.
Yes.
I found the name of that project. There was a project called Radioberry. And it was basically a transceiver hat for the Raspberry Pi. And if anybody has one or knows where to get one, hit me up on Twitter. We can talk, because it seems like a really cool project. But from what I can understand, just from what I found loosely looking for it, was kind of like a crowdsourced PCB project that everybody got in on, and there's nobody kind of actually selling those. But I'll be very interested in those. If you were to put something like that on a Raspberry Pi or go through an amplifier, you could get loads of range, especially on the frequencies that these are running on, which is like the 2 meter range and the 70 centimeters range. You know, Baofeng walkie-talkies run at like 5 watts, and they've got really decent coverage. So there's no reason that you couldn't go quite far with this, but you would have to go quite far responsibly, as Les mentioned. You know, you've got to act within local laws and licensing for this thing.
Yeah, definitely. But it's interesting that hat would be a fantastic piece of kit, and it's a shame it doesn't exist. I mean, are there plans online somewhere that you could just get the bill of materials and send the gerbers over to PCBWay, JCL, something like that, JLC, sorry?
I think you can. I think I did find a GitHub somewhere with some PCB designs on it, but I'd have to do a bit more looking into it, because one of the things that I've got that's quite handy to have is a hack RF. So if I did need this kind of thing, I could just plug the hack RF into the Raspberry Pi and go from there. But it would be very cool to have that sort of hat, because I am in the process of one of the things that got me into this was tinkering with SDR. And I am in the process of building a dedicated like SDR Pi, which is going to get rack mounted upstairs in my home lab. I've got a proper server rack in the loft. So this is going to go in there, and it'd be really cool if I could have an SDR plugged into it and a Radioberry hat on there. So
that's
yeah,
cool.
it's a shame that they're not readily available, because that'd be really cool. But range wise, yeah, I mean, responsibly, there's no reason that you couldn't put an amp in there and send it as far as you need to, really.
Brilliant. I'm just getting some comments and questions from the chat. So Wicked Yoda said that still use pages in medical. So in cardio, they're still using that. I mean, they are reliable. They're built like tanks. They run for weeks on batteries. And as you said, they're annoying when they go off. So you're not going to miss it. Yeah,
it's interesting, because I was talking to some friends who do cybersecurity, because that's a field that I dabble with. I'm on the good side, on the bad side there. But yeah, there's I've got quite a few friends who do cybersecurity for government and stuff like that, and they were saying in a lot of nuclear situations, you're not allowed mobile phones, you're not allowed two-way communications in there. So pages are still used in those kind of situations as well for security purposes. And it's interesting, because of the way that pages do work. One of the things I found through my Googling is there is a huge online advocacy for still using pagers for emergency situations, because when cell phone networks and mobile towers go down, pagers will carry on working. You can just use the same equipment you use to transmit FM signals to send a page. So yeah, they are very reliable, albeit because of how basic they are.
Yeah, definitely. My first experience of pagers, and it was called a beeper. That's what my dad called it. Yeah, it beeped. There you go. He used to be a funeral director years ago, and it's like 1980s, early 1990s, and he would get pages to go out at night to collect customers. I'll leave it at that. And I feel like beep 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 really loud. As a kid, I remember that noise, and that's what attracted me to pagers originally. And I do remember nicking his a couple of times and seeing how it worked with screwdrivers.
I had a pager. I hate to admit I'm old enough to have had a pager. When I got it, it was like I didn't have that much text on my pager. I had maybe one line of text on the pager. It was primarily you'd get the phone number of the person to call them back, because it was more expensive to get. It was more expensive to get a plan where you get like multi lines of text, like you're showing there, right? I forget what brand it was. I don't think it was Motorola, where it was just like one line of text, but primarily it was it was just like you get the phone. Most of the people just give you the phone number. I remember I was working as a stringer for a newspaper, and they would call me when they had work. And one day I was out driving around, and I didn't get it, and I missed an assignment because I didn't have cell phone or pager. So I got a pager. Oh yeah, I need this to get some work. Nowadays, we all, take for granted that we're reachable everywhere, which is a good and bad thing. But, when you look, back at, the past, maybe 20, 25 years ago, right? People weren't all reachable all the time. It wasn't, you could go out, and if you didn't stop by a payphone, you might not know what's going on. You might even be expecting an important call and be like, oh, I got to stay home because I'm hoping someone calls. Then they wouldn't call, and you'd be like, I wasted my time.
It's like waiting for a delivery in the UK at the minute. I'll be honest. I think that sentiment there is having a bit of a renaissance, if you will, because we're so used to working 24 hours a day, always being online, always being available. Even when you're on holiday, you're not on holiday. Les, prime example today, mate. And I'm like I mentioned earlier with the iPod for listening to podcasts and stuff. I'm kind of taking myself back to basics a little bit of, okay, well, one of the things that you can do on Android is you can associate contacts for like categories for like work contacts, personal contacts, family members and stuff. Set a schedule on your phone so that out of hours you don't get any calls from work contacts. I don't have my work emails on my phone anymore, and it is absolutely liberating to kind of go back to basics on stuff like this a little bit. And yeah, like you say, with pagers back in the day, if you were out and about and you were on holiday and you didn't get that message, well, you didn't get the message. There's nothing you can do. The technology failed you.
And people, and generally speaking, that was also a good excuse. You're like, well, sorry, I was on vacation, couldn't get your message. Whereas now it's like, oh, what did you bring your phone at home? What if this was really important? It's so it's a double-edged sword. The pager was a little bit more of a nice in-between technology, I feel like, because if you really needed to reach someone, you could, but it was not casual. It was not like, I'm just going to page them just for later, just because, it wasn't like email or some of the things that we might send on Slack where it's like, oh yeah, I'm just sending you a link for whenever, for the heck of it. Like, you page someone, you really needed them. I mean, that was the etiquette, right? It was important, right? Whereas, phones, it's a little bit more than a little bit different. So I think that is just so cool that you're able to transmit to it, to take this old technology and do something with it. Did you have a problem? I mean, batteries tend to degrade after a while. How are you powering the pager?
So that's a good question. And I'll be honest, one of the things, if anybody follows me online or anybody who follows me on Twitter knows, with me, things escalate. So I now own 4 pages. And don't tell my partner, don't tell my partner, but there's 2 more in the post. They all tend to use either AAA or AA batteries. The Motorola Advisor, for example, just takes a AAA in the back.
Yeah.
This Motorola Gold clone that I bought, AA in the back. This really cool one that I bought, which is a fancy Motorola. I don't know why I'm getting excited about pages. That
Why
takes
not?
a AAA as well. But the batteries on these things last, like you say, weeks. I think the battery's been in this Sports Connection one since I got it a few weeks ago, and not a peep out of it, nothing. But it's still on, it's still working. And as soon as I finish my bandpass filter, I'll start sending messages to it again. But yeah, the batteries on them seem to just last forever because it's just an LCD screen and it's just listening. But yeah, I'm collecting them now. I do this. I tend to do things in excess.
Hey, that's what we're all about over here. So I think the interesting thing, which I had totally forgotten from my pager days, because I don't remember what powered it, but is that they use standard AA and AAA batteries. You don't need to worry about getting a proprietary rechargeable battery from 1994 to power them.
Yeah, no, it's before I mean, what would this be back in the NiCad days? So nobody was using those. Certainly no lithium, no lithium ion or lipo cells back then. But yeah, the amount of time that these can last, because it is just listening. There's no two-way communication. So it doesn't have to transmit anything. And that's usually the hardest part for any transceiver is the actual transmission. So to say that it's just sat there on the side listening, the batteries can last forever in them, from what I understand.
Can you get them on a current day pager network? Because there are pager networks, right? I mean, for people using the hospital or whatever. So,
so there are pager providers out there. From what I can find, due to the fact that it is quite niche now, it's getting expensive. I was looking at a few just to see because obviously one of the hardest things I'm going to do with this project is transmit messages to it legally and within the bounds of my license, for my amateur radio license. Whereas if I was to go subscribe with a paging provider and have a pager on a frequency that they support, I can just bounce it through their service. It's their license for it. I don't need to worry about it.
Yeah.
And there are still pager providers, certainly in the UK, that are operating constantly. Like I say, there is a frequency in the UK, 15335 megahertz, that is just constantly active. You can see it on the waterfall. It's illegal to decode them and listen to them, so don't do that. But you can see those messages on the waterfall constantly, just back and forth, back and forth. So yeah, it's very much still active. As Wicked Yoda pointed out, emergency services still use them. Apparently there's ambulance services in the UK still use them. Hospitals still use them. And apparently there are some, what's the word I'm looking for? SCADA systems. So like industrial type systems that will send notifications on pager frequencies. So nowadays you'd have some sort of like API and an IoT device could send a message through a service. Well, some just broadcast them through pager frequencies. So there's loads of cool stuff going on with it still. It's just kind of old and forgotten, unfortunately.
Yeah, I mean that's what's really amazing. So what's next for you? What's the next thing you're going to try?
I mean, I would like to, because I am a licensed ham, and I've seen some really cool projects with ham centric Raspberry Pi builds. There was one I was looking at, which I'll share on Twitter later, which was building an SDR Pi that, you know, is for listening to HF frequencies, for listening to satellites to get weather reports and stuff from satellite imagery that's been bounced around in the troposphere and ionosphere. So I'm planning on building something to that effect. With regards to the pagers, like I say, I would like to ideally get them on a frequency that I can transmit on. So whether that's 433 megahertz or 438 megahertz, which is a non-variation license in the UK that you can use hotspots on. So I have what they call a Pi-Star hotspot, which is it's a ham radio project. I don't know if you've ever looked at Pi-Star before. It's quite cool.
No.
A lot of radio amateurs say it's cheating because essentially what I'm doing is I'm using a DMR radio, which is a digital voice radio, to talk to a Raspberry Pi powered hotspot, which has a MMDVM hat on it. I can't remember what MMDVM stands for, so I apologize there. It's something modem voice digital. And then what that does is the Pi connects to my home internet and allows me to talk to people all around the world using a cheap and affordable radio over the Pi Star network. Or I think it runs on the back of the Brandmeister network. But there is a project for Pi Star hotspots called DAPnet, which basically does the same thing, but for pagers. They're kind of trying to bring pagers back and make pagers usable again. So you can configure your pager, if you can get one that's either a synthetic frequency or crystal frequency, to talk to your Pi Star hotspot and then bounce messages all over the world using DAPnet. And the idea behind DAPnet is if other people are hosting hotspots, and I've got a hotspot here on my desk that's running all the time, somebody might have a hotspot near where I work, my pager would in theory pick up any messages that are sent out because it gets blasted off all the hotspots all around the world. So that's probably where I'm leaning to next. The only problem is a lot of these older pagers like the Advisor, the frequency is set by crystal. So there's a cut crystal in there for the frequency that it's on. You can't really change it. You can tweak it a little bit by adjusting some pots and changing some voltage, but you can't say, I'm going to put it on this frequency that it was never meant for. There are newer pages that are what they call synthetic frequencies, whereby you can program the frequency that you want it to be on. There's a good chance I'm probably going to have to get one of those for this project, and I'm not going to be able to make the Motorola Advisor suitable. There are a couple of people on Twitter who've hooked me up with companies that do custom cut crystals for these things still. So I'm going to try, but it is unlikely that I will be successful in the near future. It's going to be one of those things where I'm probably going to chip away at it, get bored, pick it back up, chip away at it again, get bored, and just keep having spurts of trying to get it going. But yeah, I would like to get DAPnet working, primarily because DAPnet have a feature where you can send a message through the Brandmeister network, so through the Pi Star hotspot, that it will translate into a POXAG message and blast out through the same hotspots. My plan would be to, like I say, set up a syslog server for server monitoring. I've got, a Plex server, media servers, all the stuff in the loft. What I would like to do is have any alerts hit the Brandmeister API, go through DAPnet and come out as a page. So I can get hardware alerts and stuff like that. Because like I say, if I get emails saying, oh, your server's too warm, or this RAID array is degraded, or something's gone wrong, but I don't know about anybody else who does that kind of home lab alerting, but I filtered those emails into a different mailbox years ago. And I'm not actively looking at them, and I get that many emails on that email account anyway that I probably miss it. So I just thought the pager would be a really cool way of not being able to ignore those alerts, really.
Cool. So speaking of things that are cool that we're working on, Les, what have you been working on lately?
Well, not something I've been working on directly, but something that interests me a great deal. So I've got a Creality Ender 2 Pro 3D printer. It's a tiny little thing. You can pick it up, carry it around. It weighs nothing, but it's fantastic. It does great quality prints. It's cheap, and I can fold it away and put it in the corner room, out of sight, out of mind. And for that printer, I use Prusa Slicer. And in a minute, it's 2.5. But today, 2.6 Alpha was released. So this is where I seamlessly try and remember how to use OBS and show off. I did a news post on this last week. 2.6 has got some great features. So we've got new tree support. So you can have organic tree supports that come out and hold the model. I can show you that one now. There you go. So rather than just building the scaffolding that it used to do, it now comes out and holds points of the model where there's overhangs that are greater than 40 or 45 degree, whichever one it is, and make sure that your print comes out perfect. And they're easily to rip off. So the old scaffolding ones, I've just done this recently for a spool holder I printed on an Elegoo Neptune 3 Pro for my Ender 2. That's a lot of numbers and a lot of words there. And I had to pull the scaffolding off, and it damaged the print. Not badly.
That happens to me every time. Every time.
It's a
scaffolding
pain.
Damages for me every single time. I can't deal with it. So is this going to be a lot better?
Allegedly, yes. Now, Cura's had this for a while as well. So I'm going to have a play with this when we get some time and just see which one's best and what works out well for me. But I like this organic structure. I've seen it print a Benchy, one of the little tugboats.
Mhm.
That was from Chep on a YouTube video a few weeks ago. And the supports came out perfect. Even came out from inside the cabin, the way you control the boat. It was brilliant. But that's not all you get. You've got now a measurement tool, so you can check the measurement of your prints in certain areas to make sure it's right. We've all had the problem. You've just made some objects in Tinkercad or OpenSCAD, whatever you use. You put it in the slicer. You've got to tweak something. Well, no, you can. You can measure it as well. You're laughing there. Cool feature. Text embossing tool. So you're making some trophies for a club event, having a bit of fun for a kid's party. You can just get an STL file from somewhere, so Thingiverse, Fangs, whatever you want, drop it into your slicer, so Prusa 2.6, and then put some text straight on it. So you can see that they've won sports day. You know, they've drank the most beer that evening. Not children, this is adults now. But you can build this up really quickly. Got a bit of fun. But the one I'm very interested in is Cut Tools Update. So recently I had to I had to cut apart a model that was too big, even for my Elegoo Neptune 3's print bed. So that's 220 by 220 by a lot of height.
I think 270, something like that.
270, 280, I'm not too sure.
Yeah.
I had to cut it. And I thought, how do I cut it? And I looked through tutorials on how to do it in Tinkercad, and it just seemed a bit painful. So I used Mesh Mixer, which worked out really well for me after I worked out how to use it. But then I had to import it into a slicer, and then away you go from there. So this update with Cut Tool, now we can just drop the model into the build plate, and if it's too big, just say, right, what plane do you want to slice it on? So horizontal, vertical, whatever. Slice it along that plane wherever you want it, and it just drops it on the print bed. So it's ready to go. And that's really good, especially for the Ender 2 Pro, which I'm going to use this slicer with, because the print bed on that is absolutely tiny. I think it's about 15 centimeters square and about 180 millimeters, 18 centimeters tall, which is nothing. But this literally came out just before we came on air, about half an hour before we came on air. This came out, so I'm going to have a go with it and see what I can do. But yeah, good fun.
Wow, fantastic. Do you do any 3D printing, Steve?
Do I? Yes, I've been 3D printing for a while. I don't know if Les has spotted on Twitter, but I just recently got my first resin. No, that's the wrong way around. There we go. My first resin 3D printer, the Creality Halot 1. It's only a little one. It's a baby resin one. But I've been printing FDM now for a few years. I've got a juiced up Ender 3 behind me. That's quite modded. I've got dual Z-axis on that, and just recently fitted the Sprite Pro print head on it, which that's a wonderful hot end. I love that thing.
That's nice.
And then just next to me, which you can't see, I've got a CR10S, which again, similar, that came out of the box with a dual Z, but it's been modified for direct drive and stuff like that. I love printing. And I was recently just sold on Prusa Slicer as well. I've been a Creality boy, Cura boy since we started 3D printing. I've loved that slicing application. But just recently I was printing a lot of Christmas gifts because I'm from Yorkshire and I'm cheap and it's nice and easy to print things for Christmas gifts. So I was printing these little ghosts that I found. They were going viral on TikTok, and I was like, I'm going to print this little guy. And for some reason, the legs were coming out. One leg was perfectly fine. The other leg was hollow and brittle and would just snap off. And I thought, that's not right. It doesn't look like that in the slicer when I preview it.
Yeah.
So a friend of mine on Discord said, just try Prusa Slicer. Just see how you get on with it. And I'll be honest, I've not looked back. It's a fantastic slicer. The only feature that I have missed is that organic supports that Cura has. But now that that's in there, I'm fully sold.
Yeah, I've been using Cura. I think I got a Switch, and I have to unbox it less, but I have a Neptune 3 Pro that I have to set up. So
it's a great printer. Literally just plug it in, level it, done. In fact, not even level it, just do the Z offset. That's it, done.
Yep. I had the Neptune 3, but the Pro I think is, because it has direct drive, would be better. Anyway, we talked about 3D printing. We talked about pagers. We had a great talk today, and we will be back next week with another special guest. But I want to thank Steve PanicAcid for joining us and sharing his amazing pager project. and all of you for watching and listening. We'll be back at 2 p.m. Eastern, 7 p.m. UK time, as always, next week, and we'll see you then. Bye, everyone.
Bye. Thanks for having me.